When my neighbor whispered, "The walls are thin," I never expected those words to change everything between us. I'd only been in the apartment a few weeks when I first heard her. It was late, close to midnight, when the quiet of my new place was broken by something unexpected, the soft rise and fall of a woman's voice, humming through the wall. Not loud, not clear enough to make out every word, but enough to make me pause and listen. It wasn't bothersome. In fact, there was something strangely comforting about it, like a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this unfamiliar building. The walls in this old complex carried sounds the way paper carries ink. A cupboard door shutting, footsteps across hardwood, the faint clink of dishes being stacked away, it all traveled, weaving one life into another without permission. That night, her voice was the thread that pulled me in. The next day, I saw her for the first time. She was locking her apartment door as I stepped out with a bag of trash. A woman in her 40s, elegant without trying, the kind of beauty that felt grounded, not loud or showy, but lived in. Her hair was swept back casually, a few strands falling loose to frame her face. When she noticed me, she smiled politely, then leaned just slightly closer as though she had a secret to share. Her voice was low, steady, and teasing when she whispered, "The walls are thin." I didn't know what to say at first. The remark was simple enough, yet the way she said it carried layers. Was it a warning? A confession? A playful acknowledgement that she knew I'd heard her the night before? "Thin," I repeated, offering a small nod. "Yeah, I noticed." Her lips curved into a knowing smile, and just for a moment, I swore she was studying me, as if gauging whether I was the type to complain, to gossip, or perhaps to listen too closely. She didn't linger long. With a polite excuse about needing to run, she brushed past, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume, something warm, subtle, almost floral. It lingered longer than she did. That night, I found myself lying awake, half listening again. And sure enough, the walls carried her world to me. The faint shuffle of her footsteps, the sound of a kettle coming to a boil, the faint hum of music drifting into my apartment. None of it was invasive. If anything, it made the space feel alive in a way it hadn't before. I realized then how easily curiosity can take root. I began to wonder about her life, about the story behind the quiet sadness that sometimes colored her smile. Why she lived alone. Why her words had carried the weight of both warning and invitation. The walls are thin. It should have been nothing more than a neighborly comment, a casual observation about the quirks of an old building. But the way she whispered it, just for me, in that quiet hallway, made it feel like the beginning of something neither of us could yet name. And I couldn't shake the thought, if the walls really were thin, then maybe, just maybe, that meant she could hear me too. The first time I carried her groceries, it wasn't planned. I was checking my mailbox, shuffling through the usual stack of bills and flyers, when she entered the lobby. Her arms were full, a paper bag balanced precariously against her hip, another dangling from her wrist. She moved with practiced grace, but I could see the effort in her shoulders, the quiet strain in the way she exhaled. I hesitated at first, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to assume she needed help, but then the top of the bag shifted, and a carton of eggs tilted dangerously. That was enough. "Here, let me," I said, stepping forward. Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I wondered if she might refuse. She had that kind of independence about her, a self-possession that made it clear she was used to handling life on her own. But then, just as the eggs were about to slip, she gave me a small smile, the kind that carried equal parts gratitude and resignation. "Thank you," she said softly, releasing the bag into my hands. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, nothing more than an instant, but in that instant, something sparked. Her touch was warm, deliberate, as if she wasn't entirely rushing to let go. We climbed the stairs together, the sound of our footsteps filling the quiet building. She asked casually how I was settling in, and I told her the place was starting to feel like home. "Old buildings have their quirks," she said with a little laugh. "Some people find the noise bothersome. Me, I find it comforting. Like the building's alive." I glanced sideways at her. "So when you said the walls are thin, was that a warning?" Her smile deepened, eyes glinting. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted you to know I was aware." There it was again, the way she spoke as if each word had two meanings, one polite, one secret. When we reached her door, she pushed it open with her shoulder and gestured for me to set the bag on the counter inside. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and fresh linen, the kind of scent that made the space instantly warm, lived in. As I placed the bag down, I caught sight of small details, books stacked unevenly on the shelf, a framed photo of her standing on a beach with the wind in her hair, a half-finished puzzle spread across the dining table. These glimpses felt like pages of a story I wanted to keep reading. "You didn't have to help," she said, leaning lightly against the counter, arms folded. But there was no sharpness in her tone. Instead, her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than necessary. "I wanted to," I answered simply. Her lips curved again, that same quiet smile from the hallway days before. Then, almost playfully, she added, "Careful. If you keep being kind, I might start knocking on your door when I need something." The way she said it made my chest tighten. A joke on the surface, perhaps. But underneath, I could hear it, a woman who carried her independence like armor, yet wasn't untouched by the idea of someone standing close beside her. As I left her apartment, the faint sound of her humming drifted behind me. And for the first time since moving in, I realized I was beginning to look forward to the little moments in the hallway, the mailbox, the stairwell. Moments where our lives brushed together like fingertips over a grocery bag, brief, ordinary, but charged with something I couldn't ignore. It was one of those nights where the world outside seemed restless. Rain lashed against the windows, wind whistled through the cracks, and the hallway lights flickered as if even the building was uncertain of itself. I had just set down a mug of coffee when there was a knock at my door, soft, hesitant, almost uncertain. Opening it, I found her standing there, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Strands of her hair clung damply to her cheeks from the rain. "The power's acting up," she said with a small, sheepish smile. "I thought, maybe you'd like some company. Or maybe I just didn't feel like sitting alone tonight." Her honesty caught me off guard, but I stepped aside instantly. "Of course. Come in." She walked in, carrying with her the faint scent of rain and jasmine. I offered her a towel, and she laughed quietly as she dabbed at her hair. Then she noticed the kettle still warm on the counter. "Tea?" she asked, arching a brow. "Tea," I confirmed, and in minutes we were settled on my couch, two steaming mugs between us, the glow of a single candle casting long shadows across the room. Outside, thunder rolled, making the walls tremble faintly. Inside, the silence between us was soft, almost protective. At first we talked about little things, neighbors we'd both noticed, how the building seemed older than it really was, even the leaky faucet in her kitchen that drove her crazy. But as the minutes stretched on, her voice softened, as though the storm had drawn something out of her. "I've lived here 3 years," she said, eyes fixed on the rim of her cup. "It's quiet, usually. Too quiet. After my divorce, I thought the silence would be peaceful. But sometimes it feels like the walls are pressing in." Her fingers traced absently along the side of her mug, as if searching for steadiness. Then she lifted her eyes to mine, vulnerability flickering there in a way I hadn't seen before. "You ever notice how thin these walls are?" she whispered, almost as if confiding a secret she hadn't meant to share. The words echoed our first meeting in the hallway. But this time, the meaning was different. There was no teasing smile, no playful lilt. Instead, there was rawness, a woman admitting she felt exposed, even in her own space. "Yes," I said quietly. "I've noticed." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the storm outside, the soft clink of rain against glass, the brush of her knee against mine where we sat too close on the couch. She didn't move away, and neither did I. She let out a breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "It's funny. Sometimes I think if someone listened closely enough, they'd know everything about me. Every laugh, every sigh, every lonely night." I swallowed, my chest tightening. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing," I said before I could stop myself. Her gaze lingered on me, searching, weighing, as if trying to decide whether I meant the words the way they sounded. And then, slowly, her shoulders relaxed. She leaned back against the couch, close enough that our arms touched, the warmth of her body grounding me against the storm. For the first time, I felt like she wasn't just my neighbor. She was a woman letting me glimpse the quiet corners of her life, the parts she usually kept hidden behind elegant smiles and polite words. And in that flickering candlelight, I realized I wanted to keep listening. What began as small exchanges in the hallway soon grew into something more natural, almost expected. Some evenings, I'd hear her laugh through the wall, a bright, unguarded sound that carried into my apartment and made me smile without meaning to. The next day, she'd tease me in passing. "So," she'd say, tilting her head with that amused sparkle in her eyes, "did you enjoy the comedy show I was watching last night?" Her tone was playful, but underneath, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. We both knew the walls were thin, and we both knew we were paying attention to each other more than we admitted. One evening, I remembered a book she'd mentioned in conversation, a favorite from her 20s, something she hadn't read in years. By chance, I'd found a copy at a small second-hand shop downtown. I knocked on her door, holding it behind my back like a secret I wasn't sure how she'd take. When she opened the door, she was barefoot, wearing a simple cardigan over a loose blouse. She looked surprised to see me, then curious. "I found something," I said, handing her the book. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it, and for a moment she just stared at the cover, silent. Then she laughed softly, the sound thick with memory. "I can't believe you remembered this. I used to underline passages in my old copy, like every sentence was some revelation." She flipped through the pages as if expecting to see her younger self hiding there. When her eyes lifted to meet mine, there was something unspoken in them, gratitude, yes, but also recognition. Recognition that I had been listening, that I cared enough to notice what mattered to her. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice lower, almost hushed. The air shifted between us. What might have been a casual gesture suddenly felt heavier, more intimate. We stood there in the threshold of her apartment, the hallway quiet except for the faint hum of the overhead light. I was the first to break the silence, offering a half-smile. "Well, since the walls are thin, I figured I should give you something quieter to read instead of making me hear your TV shows." She laughed again, softer this time, and shook her head. But she didn't let go of the moment. Instead, she reached out, her hand resting gently on top of mine, not a fleeting brush this time, but deliberate. Her palm was warm, her touch steady. My breath caught, and for a second, I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. She left her hand there, her thumb grazing my knuckles in the faintest of movements, as if testing how much closeness we could allow. The world around us seemed to fade. The hallway disappeared, the book forgotten between us. All I was aware of was her hand over mine, the faint scent of coffee lingering from her apartment, the way her eyes softened as they searched mine. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The silence carried more weight than words could. When she finally let go, it wasn't with reluctance, but with a promise. A quiet acknowledgement that something was changing, even if neither of us dared to name it yet. And that night, when I lay in bed, I found myself listening again, not for her laughter or her footsteps, but for the proof that she was there, only a wall away, thinking perhaps the same thing I was. It started with something ordinary. She had asked me if I could help fix a shelf in her living room that had begun to tilt dangerously to one side. I arrived one Saturday afternoon, toolbox in hand, trying to keep my thoughts practical, steady, as though tightening screws could anchor the quickening pulse I felt whenever I was around her. Her apartment was bathed in late sunlight, golden streaks spilling across the hardwood floors. The shelf stood stubborn and crooked, stacked with books that threatened to topple at any moment. I crouched down, working carefully, while she lingered nearby, pretending to straighten the spines of novels but really just watching me. I could feel her gaze, not intrusive, but present, warm. "You're good at this," she said after a while, her voice carrying that blend of casual and intimate she always managed. I glanced up, smirking. "It's just a screwdriver and a few loose screws." "Still," she said softly, her eyes on me, not the shelf. By the time I tightened the last bolt, she had stepped closer. When I stood, we were only a foot apart. I could smell her perfume, that same subtle, floral note I'd begun to associate with comfort. "Better?" I asked, nodding at the now straightened shelf. She smiled, then leaned in, just enough that her breath grazed my ear as she whispered, "The walls are thin." I froze. The words were the same as before, but the tone was different. It wasn't playful this time, nor a warning in the practical sense. It was layered with something heavier, desire, hesitation, fear. I turned to face her fully, my voice low, steady. "Then let them hear." Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in recognition. She searched my face as if needing to be certain I meant it, that I wasn't just teasing her back. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock, the thrum of both our heartbeats in the charged space between us. She lifted her hand, almost cautiously, and rested it on my arm. The warmth of her touch spread like fire through me. My instinct was to pull her into me, but I held still, letting her decide how close we would get. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, though her grip on my arm tightened as if she wanted the opposite of her words. I shook my head gently. "I know exactly what I'm saying." For a long moment, she just looked at me, her lips parted, her breath uneven. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning the strands into threads of gold. She was beautiful, not in some distant, untouchable way, but in the human way that comes with life lived, with strength and fragility woven together. Then she exhaled, a sound halfway between surrender and relief, and leaned her forehead lightly against mine. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The closeness itself felt louder than anything we could have spoken. The walls were thin. Maybe the neighbors would hear the quiet murmur of our voices, the hush of two people finally stepping into the truth of what had been building between them. And for the first time, I didn't care. The days after that afternoon lingered in a delicate haze. We spoke more, but not always with words. A look, a small smile, the way our hands brushed accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, seemed to carry more meaning than anything either of us could say aloud. One evening, she knocked on my door without warning. She was wearing a soft sweater, the kind that made her look both approachable and untouchable at the same time. Her eyes held that familiar mixture of hesitation and warmth, and she asked if we could just sit for a while, somewhere quiet, away from the noise of the building, the world outside, and even the walls that carried our whispered exchanges. We ended up in her apartment, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. The golden light pooled around her, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek and the soft shine of her hair. I noticed how small movements, the way she reached for her tea, the slight tilt of her head, seemed amplified, magnified by the tension simmering beneath the surface. She sat on the couch first, patting the space beside her. I hesitated, then joined her, careful to respect her space but close enough that the warmth of her body brushed against mine. The contact was minimal, almost accidental, but it made my pulse skip. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand rested lightly on her lap, close enough that our knees touched. I'm nervous, she admitted quietly, almost to herself. I haven't felt this close to anyone in a long time. Her words hung in the air. I wanted to say something reassuring, but instead I let my presence speak for me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she leaned into me. Her head found my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her body settle there, as if testing whether it could rest without falling. I placed my arm around her gently, careful not to startle her, letting the moment unfold naturally. The warmth of her head against me, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the rich aroma of tea, and the quiet hum of the lamp all combined into something that felt sacred, intimate, and unspoken. She shifted slightly, tilting her face toward mine, though our eyes never met directly. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the gentle press of her cheek against my chest, the way her fingers twitched as if wanting more contact but unsure where to place it. I didn't move. I waited, letting her take the lead, letting the closeness speak for what words could not. After some time, she exhaled, a soft, trembling sound that seemed to release a lifetime of restraint. Her fingers brushed against mine, lingering just long enough to make the point clear, she was letting me in. She trusted me with this vulnerability. And for the first time, I allowed myself to simply hold her, to breathe her in, to let the quiet surrender fill the space between us. No declarations. No grand gestures. Just two people finding comfort, warmth, and trust in the proximity of one another. The thin walls no longer felt intrusive. They didn't need to be hidden from. This closeness was ours, fragile yet profound, and for now, it was enough. We didn't rush. We didn't force anything. We simply existed together in the stillness, discovering that sometimes the greatest intimacy comes not from action, but from simply being present fully, completely, quietly, together. Morning arrived softly, brushing its pale light through her curtains. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering perfume from the night before, a scent that felt now like a gentle reminder of what had shifted between us. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, mugs in hand, the quiet broken only by the occasional drip from the kettle and the distant hum of traffic outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Our eyes met, holding the memory of last night in their depths, the quiet surrender, the brush of hands, the warmth of shared silence. It was a look that said more than words ever could, acknowledgement of desire, fear, hesitation, and trust all wrapped into one. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, breaking the stillness. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. "Scared of what people might think, what I might feel." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. The contact was gentle but deliberate, grounding. "I don't care what anyone thinks," I said. "What matters is what we feel. Right here, right now." She looked down at our hands, then back at me, a tentative smile forming on her lips. "Right here, right now," she echoed, testing the phrase as if tasting its truth. There was no rush. No need to define the future, no pressure to speak in absolutes. We sat together, letting the silence fold around us, letting the comfort of proximity speak louder than any promises we could make. Her hand fit naturally in mine, our fingers interlacing almost instinctively, the small warmth of touch carrying a reassurance neither of us had fully realized we needed. "Do you want to?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper, vulnerable and honest. I squeezed her hand lightly, letting her feel the certainty I couldn't yet put into words. "Yes," I said simply. "But we can take it slow. No rush. We don't have to know everything today." Her lips curved into a soft, almost shy smile, and she leaned slightly forward, resting her forehead briefly against mine. That small, fleeting gesture said more than a confession ever could. It was intimacy in its purest form, trust without demand, closeness without expectation. For the first time, the thin walls didn't feel like a threat. If the neighbors overheard laughter, soft words, or even the quiet thrum of our hands brushing, it wouldn't matter. What mattered was the bond we had quietly built, tender, respectful, and real. We lingered like that for some time, neither speaking, just existing in the warmth of the morning and each other. Outside, the world continued in its usual rhythm, but inside her apartment, time seemed to slow, allowing us to savor the fragile, exhilarating certainty of connection. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know what comes next." I smiled softly. "Neither do I. But maybe it's enough to just be here, together. We'll figure out the rest, one step at a time." She nodded, her hand tightening around mine, a silent acknowledgement that this was enough for now, enough to trust, enough to hope, enough to let the walls witness the quiet beginning of something neither of us could have planned but both of us had longed for. And in that delicate, unhurried moment, the story of our connection found its resolution, together, aware of the uncertainty ahead, but fully present in the certainty of each other's presence.